Cool. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So welcome, Rob Klein. Thanks for agreeing to be interrogated by me.
Hey, Jason.
So for people who might not know you, like, how would you characterize yourself and sort of what's kind of your origins of getting into collecting stuff? Because I know you've been doing this way, way, way longer than I have. So.
Well, yeah, I wanted to be in the entertainment industry, and I was in film school, and got working on started to work on shows, and I noticed really quickly that you'd be like at Universal, and you'd say, you'd be in the wardrobe department, and you'd say, "Hey, can I see the Battlestar Galactica stuff?" And they were like, "We don't have any of that." I'm like, "What do you mean you don't have it?" And they'd be like, "Oh yeah, we got rid of that stuff." And I'd be like, "What do you mean you got rid of it?" And then, shortly after, you kind of go, "Oh my God, they don't keep this stuff, or they don't keep all of it." And this was in the early 90s. So this was before Universal had a archive. So then when I was like, "Oh, wait, some of my favorite shows are actually out there somewhere." And I was like, "Okay, game on." So it was like a lifetime commitment to sort of track down all the stuff that, means so much to us all.
So is there an actual like first thing that you bought that was like a movie prop or production asset or something?
Yeah. I lived in Toluca Lake growing up, which is kind of the area around like the Burbank Studios, or what they call Warner Brothers now. At the time I was growing up, it was the Burbank Studios. For the history people out there, they called it the Burbank Studios because Columbia Pictures moved on to the Burbank, or they moved into Burbank on the Warner lot, and then Warner, being fair, said, "Well, we won't have the Warner Brothers logo on the water tower. We'll just call it the Burbank Studios." But they were always, I think for me, the thing that blew my mind is when we would go to the local store, with like my mom or something, you'd be literally parking on the little corner of the, what they call it, the Warner Ranch. It used to be the Columbia Ranch. And you'd sit in the car and you'd see like the facades of the movie studios backlot. So I grew up with this sort of like, what do you mean? Like, everybody, when they go to the convenience store, don't have a movie lot that they go to, get your whatever. So, you'd ride your bike and you'd be riding around the studios. So I guess it's like that really captured my imagination. And then also they would film a lot of TV shows in the neighborhood. And I think one of the first movie props I ever saw was a pistol from V.
Oh, wow.
And it just blew my mind. It was just like amazing. It was like how it was made. And, it was, I don't know how many people care about V, but the pistol itself is fascinating because it's like made out of metal and resin. So it was really well made. And that sort of captured my imagination. But the long-winded answer to your story, I think the first thing I got was a costume from Battlestar Galactica, from like an episode that like really captured my imagination. And then it just was, it was like amazing. So it wasn't just getting something from a movie or television show, it was getting something that really meant a lot to me. So it just sort of the satisfaction of seeing it in person and then sort of becoming the caretaker of it just was magical. I mean, for lack of a better word.
I was like I was the biggest fan of V as a kid. I remember because I would actually read TV Guide and you know, learned about it before it came on, and this was like in the early days of VCRs. Like my parents didn't have a VCR, but my grandparents did. They had one of those like top loader ones, and it had a exactly
Yeah.
it had a corded remote with one button, so you could either use it to like play, pause, or stop. So I went to their house every night when they were airing V, and I would record it and edit out the commercials. So I had it on VHS, and I watched it like over and over and over and over and over again. Like I loved that series, and then the sequel. And I remember actually that scene where they're playing with like the little action figures, like in the scene of the film or the show. And I always thought, oh, I wonder if those action figures are going to come out. So I was always like, when I'd go to Mervin's or something or Toys R Us, I'd be looking out like, oh, are those V action figures on the little shuttle going to come out? But I did, had a couple of V things. I'd gotten one of the helmets, one of the shock trooper helmets. And then at one point I got in touch with a guy who was one of the prop masters on the series, and he had saved one pistol and one rifle that were like in incredible condition. And I drove to LA and bought them from him. But you know, like most, pretty much all the movie props ever, I ended up selling them to get something else. But those were like really, really cool pieces.
Well, I have so much to say just on this little thing. First of all, I remember you and I talking about V. That was like one of the first conversations we had. I think how we bonded and of our passion for V.
Yeah.
But you know, I'll tell you one thing that I find. You also mentioned, you know, having stuff and parting with it. You know, that was the thing that really is sort of the bittersweet part of it, is that you know, sometimes we part with stuff that we really would have rather have kept. And there's, you know, we all can relate to having all sorts of circumstances of why we part with stuff, whether it's just merely anywhere from, this has never been me, fortunately, but I don't care about this stuff anymore, being on one side of
Right.
the one side of the, you know, the gauge, and then the other side could be anywhere from, you know, I got to make money or raise money, or I need to raise money to buy another prop or costume. But I always say to everybody, if I had had a trust fund, I would have had it all, because I mean, there was so much stuff in the early 90s that was just around, and there were people into it, but it certainly was. It was like the Wild West back then, you know. It was like stuff was everywhere. And then the other thing I was going to add was, speaking of the action figure sequence from V, there's the shuttle that the kids are playing with, or the squad vehicle. I don't remember the exact terminology. The V fans could correct us with the inaccuracies of it. But I had that miniature that you know, and it's funny because I had it and I partied with it. It was wonderful. And then you get people that find you and are like, we hear that you had the shuttle, you know, and yeah, I did. And can you put me in the right direction? And it was like, well, that was like, God, that was like nearly 30 years ago, you know. Yeah. But it's so funny. And then people find the piece. And then, you know what the sad thing is? You find that the piece was in beautiful condition, original condition, which is how I always support leaving all props. And you find out that someone had decided that they were going to turn it into a miniature shuttle with the landing gear. So they like altered the toy. It had like Tonka Troy wheels on the bottom, and you find out they added like landing gear to it, and you're just like, oh my God, no, why would you do that?
No.
So I don't know why they had done that, but it's sad when you see something that was perfect and then it leaves your possession, and then it gets sort of altered, and maybe not in a good way. So if nothing else, that's why I wish I would have hung on to some of these things, so you could sort of protect them and keep them from having that sort of thing happen to them, you know? I don't know if you I'm sure
Oh
you've,
yeah. Yeah. I mean,
preferred.
I won't call anyone out, but there's something I sold where I had accumulated like all kinds of provenance and paperwork and documents and backup material and everything. And I sold it to him, and I think he sold it like maybe a couple weeks later and didn't even pass that stuff on to the next person, just like tossed it all. And I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, that's the one thing about this stuff is like we are handling history, so you have to really try to do your research. And one of the things that happens, I don't know if you've heard of this, or like you, especially with costuming, people will get costumes and then they run them through the dry cleaner, which is great. It keeps them clean and all sorts of things. Keeps, if there's any bugs or whatever, it will kill all that. But sometimes, if there's like a flaw or a stain or a distress point on a costume, you think, oh, this is dirty. And, I cannot tell you how many times where I've like screen matched stuff because of that,
yeah.
whether it's distressing intentionally or just, some sort of a smudge or something that just was part of the costume. So anyway, I guess we're giving away a candy making secret, but it's like, don't clean your wardrobe because it could lead to a screen match. So anyway.
Yeah, one thing I've done, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because I know you have a background like with and preservation and everything, but I've been told, and this is what I've done with rock and roll costumes, is steam cleaning with a mix of water and vodka. That kind of kills, any kind of living organisms that might be dwelling in the costumes. Is that something you've heard of, or do you have any better suggestions?
Yeah, 100%. I've heard that. And certainly you don't want to take, I collect rock and roll as well, or just music, as you and I share that passion. But yeah, you do not want to run like a Gene Simmons costume through the dry cleaning, because the one I have still has all the blood and whatnot on it, from all his stage antics. But yeah, I've actually heard that they not only use that in preservation, but also just, people that maintain wardrobe for, rock bands or whatever. Or I think they even do. I've even heard them doing that for like creature suits when they.
Oh, really?
I actually, matter of fact, I'm currently working for Sid and Marty Krofft Pictures, and we actually, when we put when we do stuff with the Puff and Stuff PR costume, we'll use that technique, overnight. If we have to put somebody in the suit the next day and make sure it's anyway.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because a lot of times people don't know, like, there can be things in there that will destroy fabric or whatever that you don't see. So, and then if you bring something in, it can obviously spread to other things that you have. So,
yeah, I remember when I used to work for the Walt Disney Company and I was their manager of their archive. There were a lot of costumes that were in the Florida theme park at Disney Hollywood Studios. And anytime that we would loan them something, and then it would be coming back to the Burbank or Glendale storage facility, because of the insects in Florida, we would have to, in Florida at the facility, they actually have a giant freezer, and they would actually freeze the costume and to try to eliminate the parasites or bugs or whatever. So isn't that interesting that,
I know from my experience, there was, this was a collection I worked on, but I know if there's any kind of moth larvae or anything that's one of the techniques is putting it in the freezer, because at least it'll arrest whatever might be happening. So
yeah, I never really asked much about, does that really harm the wardrobe? But I guess you first and foremost can't have it eaten alive.
Right.
So I guess pick one of your problems. I guess it's like start crossing off the biggest problem, because of the the wackiness with the insects in Florida. So
right. So, given your experience at Disney, can you kind of give an overview for people who might not know, like how studio archives work, like how that works, how things, and I know all studios are different, and maybe you could speak to other studios as well, but like when a movie wraps, you know, how do things get there? How are they organized? What are the determinations on what to keep and what not to keep? And for the things that aren't kept, like sort of what are options?
Well, not to sound bitter or be very like negative, because I try to always be very positive. Before going to Disney, it was always very like, oh, wow, Disney Archives, because they were founded in 1970, so they were the first studio archive, which is
No, I
pretty
didn't know
cool.
that. Yeah, that's interesting.
Dave Smith, who I was very proud to work with, he was like the founder of the archives. He was hired by Roy Disney, who was Walt's brother, who was sort of the business financial lead of the Walt Disney Company. He was hired by Roy Disney himself and brought in, and the first sort of archiving job was to archive Walt Disney's two offices. He had a working office and a formal office. And it's really neat because the Walt Disney, who I just think is one of the greatest creative people ever. So I'm fascinated with everything he used to do in his day-to-day routine. The formal office would be the one with like the piano. So if like the Sherman Brothers were going to come in and play them like a new song, it would be in the formal office. But I always say he used the working office more because that's the one that had a bar in it. And it's hilarious because literally it had the Star Trek door bar where you push the button and the door literally would open up. I would be like, that's total BS. That's a rumor, but I saw it with my own two eyes. The door opens up, and then if you opened up the cabinets, they would light up, and they literally had like GE, like embossed in metal inside the cabinets, clearly installed by General Electric, who is a sponsor for Walt Disney. Anyway, so I'm just sharing with everybody the fact that some of these urban myths that sound too good to be true, in this case with Walt's office, it was true. But anyway, so that was the first gig for Disney, which started the archive. And so when I finally got there, the real sad thing was, and I hope, they take this is the truth, is that they had like 15 costumes archived. I thought they had everything. And you got there, I was like, wait, you only have 15 costumes? I'm like, okay, well, they had Mary Poppins incomplete, mind you. And then they had a couple of other things, but I mean, like, wait, where is everything? And they'd be like, well, that's why one of the reasons why we hired you is because we're closing the wardrobe department down and we need you to go through the wardrobe department and see if you could find anything of note before it was sold off. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's the public perception of what the studio archives have and do, and then there's the reality sort of once you get behind the Wizard of Oz line. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. But I mean, they're all works in progress, and an archive is really only as good as the people that make up the archive. So, and again, Dave Smith, he was very interested in the Disney memorabilia. He was very interested in paperwork, documentation. He did a magnificent job. But that's why I think I was such a benefit to the Disney company for the archives, is because I was, coming from a, decade plus of hands-on experience with wardrobe and props. So I was like, oh, let's go. Let's build this archive up. And the vice president who was in charge of the archives at the time was all about that too. So he literally just was like, with me, so let's like go. Just go for it, And so that's sort of part one.
So was there like storage, and then there's the archives, and you're sort of going to storage and sort of determining what is getting elevated into the archives?
Yeah, well, they have, so the Disney company being so huge, they had like the studio lot where like the Disney studios were that Walt and Roy built the studio. That was where like the archives office would be. So there would be like on the site, there would be like the paperwork and contracts and things like that, because the legal team was always working with the archives. And then like, they had like, there was like a beautiful display cases that they handed off to me to design and install the displays. And then there would be, there was one offsite temperature controlled storage facility that the archives had. When I started acquiring the wardrobe and the props, they literally told me, okay, you need to set up a site B, if you will, for the archives. And they gave us an old hangar that Disney had. They didn't own the property, but they maintained it. It's like where they would build like theme park rides for like Epcot, like in Glendale, and they would ship them off to like Florida. So they gave me a space in that facility, and I basically had to set it up from scratch. So it was literally like, okay, first step is we have to put in a chain link fence, and then we have to like put in all the pallet racking. And so it was literally, now I see sometimes archives videos and I'm just like, oh yeah, there it is. I set that place up. So it was just like, it was like when they were really getting into the dimensional assets at Disney, I mean, I was there from the ground floor. And so I think I took the costume collection from like 15 pieces to like nearly 3,000 pieces. And that was just with what we sort of picked out of the wardrobe department. I mean, it was amazing what was still there. I mean, like we found a second Mary Poppins hat, and like literally 1 week the hat was like being rented, or could have been rented for, whatever. And then like not more than a week or two later, I was at Entertainment Weekly doing a photo shoot with the hat, and they published it in the, in Entertainment Weekly. I don't know if you know.
Was that article, the things, what was it called? The things that, I'm trying to remember. I remember there was an Entertainment Weekly thing. It had like Rosebud and different things in it.
Did it have the cross from The Exorcist?
I think so.
Yeah, that was the one thing that turned out that hasn't escaped me that day, because I remember like, who had this? You know what I mean? Who saved this?
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, we can't tell you. But it clearly was like, that's what's so funny is that, that every now and then stuff shows up that was never an auction, or it's from a private collection that you just are not aware of. And then I was like, oh my God, somebody saved the cross from The Exorcist. So I remember thinking like Mary Poppins hat, the cross from The Exorcist, two completely opposite sides of the spectrum of props.
Yeah, I remember I scanned that article and put it in the original prop blog. I'll go back and look when I'm editing this video and see if that's a totally different article or if that's the one you're talking about. But I remember it was one of the only like movie prop things I ever saw on Entertainment Weekly back in it's a long time ago.
I saved it just because I was so proud of, having been a part of that, that article. I do these show with our colleagues, and we'll start talking about something like really like left field, and I'll say, oh, I can provide a photo of that for B-roll. And then I watch the show, and then they never put the B-roll in. So I'm like, what's the point of keeping this stuff?
No, I will. I'm like,
I know you love it. Yeah. Yeah.
For me, editing is just as fun, because then I'm like, oh, what could I find to like slip in there? So,
well, I mean,
cool.
one of the things I learned, it was so great because I had done like some, writing, and I had produced some documentaries before coming to Disney. And it was so great because once they figured out like, oh, I remember I was so proud because I was putting a display together, and the VP was like kind of watching me, and then I heard him say like, oh, Rob looks like he knows what he's doing, which I was so proud to hear. But then later, like they saw that I had, could do some writing and did some, so I was able to like, I did a documentary, directed a documentary about the Walt Disney Archives, and then also did a lot of articles. So I love the history of it as well. So, and the one thing that VP used to always say is, when you write an article, make sure you find a picture that illustrates what you're talking about. And I love that. So it's like, if we could talk about this stuff and then provide anybody out there that cares a picture, I just feel like it really hits at home.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So Were you involved in any of the exhibitions, like the D23 stuff or Comic-Con, and like what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, knowing Disney, I mean, it's going to be interesting if I start saying this and that, but I helped create D23. I was part of the core team that kind of came up with it all. And I very proud because I said, well, Disney really should have its own Comic-Con. And they were like, the VP
Yeah.
was like, what's Comic-Con? And I was like, oh, okay, game on. We're going to Comic-Con. So we went to Comic-Con and he was like, was blown away. And at least at the time when I was at Disney, the expo, the D23 expo, was the biggest and most successful thing about D23 at the time. So I was very proud that that I was able to sort of like, connect the dots there. So we did like exhibits at Comic-Con when D23 was first off the ground. Walt Disney still was really involved there. And I remember they're like, well, what do you want to show at Comic-Con? And I said, well, let's show superheroes. And they were like, well, what Disney superheroes are there? I said, well, we just recently, Disney made a movie called Sky High. I don't know if anybody ever saw that. It was with Kurt Russell.
Wasn't the writer of that going to do like a Greatest American Hero
Probably
film too?
Yeah.
I think, if I remember right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, we should talk about Greatest American Hero in a sec, but I'll go cut the chase. So I was like, well, let's show Sky High. And he's like, huh? Because the movie didn't really do that well. And I said, let's show Condor Man. He's like, Condor Man? Well, nobody cares about. I don't even know if he knew what it was, but basically he was like, and I was like, oh no, just watch. Let me bring Condor Man and just watch. And of course, you bring him to a place like Comic-Con where everybody gets it. Everybody loves superhero movies, and people loved seeing Condor Man. And for those that don't know, that was an early '80s superhero spoof movie starring Michael Crawford. Really niche, but the people that do know who Condor Man was, I mean, they were like flipping out. So I was very proud to try to show them that just because a movie may not have been a blockbuster doesn't mean it doesn't have a loyal fan base and touch people. And it's certainly, if you're going to find your people, they're going to be at Comic-Con, because that's where all the true fanatics and passionate people for all things, genre go, right? So that was
and
fun.
We should say this was pre-Disney acquiring Marvel, so it was a lot different at that time.
Yeah, and just to answer the question, and then I was able to, I curated and did like the exhibit catalog / book, wrote that, and then art directed all the photos for the 2009 Treasures of the Walt Disney Archives and the 2011 Treasures of the Walt Disney Archives, and just so proud of that, and they were just so fun to work on. And but if you want, I could tell you a little bit about like acquiring props from production, if you want to talk a little bit about that. Okay, because again, definitely. I mean, I have so much to tell you.
Oh, I know.
But okay, so I think the one thing that really sort of I was really proud about, but also it was a little bit of a fight internally with Disney. I kept saying, like, okay, so the first Pirates of the Caribbean, the first 3 movies were done. They were in the can, they had been released, and they were getting ready to start production on the 4th Pirates movie. And I remember saying to the vice president, because he was good friends with, or not good friends, but was in Bob Iger's ear. So he was able to sort of, if there was something that maybe one of the other business units wasn't doing, he was able to sort of say something and maybe get some movement. You know how it is, politics and all that. Yeah. But I remember saying, like, look, if we don't get a Jack Sparrow costume at the Disney archives now, what's going to end up happening is anything that's still at the company from the first 3 Pirates movies is going to get like altered or changed for the 4th movie, or who knows, So, because at that time, they hadn't turned over anything Pirates of the Caribbean to the archives. So I really fought to say, give us a Jack Sparrow now. And of course, production or whoever the asset people were sort of like, we really can't do that unless we got permission, from high up. And they were like, well, why? You're going to get one eventually, but why now? And I explained to them, I said, because we, as an archive, we need to have an example of this is what Jack Sparrow's costume looked like from first 3 films. If Jack Sparrow goes off and makes more movies, you never know, his wardrobe will change or can be altered. And that's the point of the archive, is to say, here's a Jack Sparrow circa first 3 films. And I said, the funny thing is, in history, no one's going to remember that, oh, well, they couldn't get one because for whatever reason, they didn't let them have one. They're just going to say those idiot archivists weren't smart enough to save a Johnny Depp Jack Sparrow suit. And I gave that exact pitch, and they were like, okay, not. And so they literally, when they heard that, they were like, okay, you can go in and grab anything you want from Pirates.
Nice.
And then that was really neat because I got to go into where they had stored it all, and they were like, well, what do you want? And I was like, well, okay. So I said, let's take a Jack Sparrow, and let's, take, this character, that character. So that was, I think, actually, just to be accurate, I think the archives was given one of the first coins prior to that, from the first movie that the character wore around her neck. That, remember the one that, So that was kind of an obvious one, but I remember I was also thinking like, okay, well, I remember asking, how many coins did you guys make? And they were like, well, we made 888 of them. I'm like, just like in the movie.
Right.
Anyway, so sometimes maybe they were being. I never did see the Tupperware box filled with coins, but I heard that when crew members were sweeping the stage up, they would find the coins, after they, so anyway, Pirates.
Interesting. So, can you talk a little bit about Tron?
Yeah.
Because I know that's something that you worked on.
Tron was in the wardrobe department, and because it was so unique, I mean, the people that worked at Disney Wardrobe obviously were like, well, that stuff's Tron. And I said, let's save the stuff. And I was told, save 2. And I was like, you can't save 2. I can't save 2, and so I just sort of said, well, let's I think I saved 14 different characters. And it took me about a year to kind of piece them all back together again. And I was able to make like pretty near 14 near complete costumes. From all great characters, Tron, Flynn, Ram, Yori. And then it was really interesting. Tron Legacy got a green light, and then the art department from Tron Legacy used to come and see me quite often, because at one point, and I hope that I'm not giving away some sort of a future plan, but in case they want to reuse this, but there was a sequence in the movie that was planned, like they had to go inside of an old file to recover some data or something. So they were going to go into this old file within the Tron, what is it, universe, or inside the computer, and everybody was going to look the exact same way they did in the original Tron. So they were very interested in like the suits that I had saved and put back together.
Oh, interesting.
Because they were going to like recreate them, and I was so excited about that, because it wasn't a lot of, they didn't actually get to the point where they were remaking the suits, but they were a lot of talk about doing it. And I guess before they actually put money into making the suits again, or the old suits, they had decided to cut the sequence. So, but that was really cool.
So then what happens to the ones that aren't put in the archives, like whatever pieces?
Well, with Tron, and this, I took everything. It took everything.
Okay.
Because, and they were more than happy with that, because you couldn't rent it. I mean, you could, but I mean, that's the one thing that all the wardrobe houses have learned, is that more often than not, sci-fi stuff doesn't rent. And that was why Universal sold off their sci-fi department. They sold it off to a costume house, that professional union costume house. And then they soon learned that, well, no one rents all this Buck Rogers and Battlestar Galactica stuff. And so then that's how they sold it off in bulk. And because it doesn't rent. And, most people want to, make their own sci-fi stuff or whatever. I guess if you don't have a budget, you'd go in and rent things, but But anyway, so that was it. So that's why the Disney wardrobe department really had no interest in Tron. Some things were never found, like the Jeff Bridges tunic. If you know what I'm talking, how he wears like a
kind of like sash.
Yeah, and it was. I'm a good friend. Shout out to Harrison Allenshaw, who was one of the producers of Tron, and being a good buddy, I've had the ability to just like ask him every stupid question under the planet. But like, why did Jeff Bridges wear that? He says, because nobody could tell the difference between Tron or Flynn. And so we did that to sort of immediately let the audience recognize, what the character difference was. And I was like, oh, okay. But that was like something that never showed up in wardrobe. So I can only assume they're still hanging on the rack there somewhere, or they were like tossed out when someone is like, what is this thing? Right. You know what I mean? I don't know. Throw it away. Which happens more often than not, with collectors come up to me all the time and they'll be like, do you have this or that or this piece? And I would be like, no. And then what happened to all that stuff? And I always tell them that, like, well, at this stage, if something's like rare on a costume that we know that they made a lot of, it more often than not would mean the box got thrown out. You know what I'm saying? Like just general costume pieces for things, Yeah.
So. Yeah. Well, I know I was going through the prop store catalog for their auction, and they have that helmet. What's the villain's name?
Oh, Sark.
Sark. Yeah, that thing looks amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what they made? Is that
it's metal?
It's made out of?
It's like the frame is metal, and then there's like the kind of a vinyl cowling that goes underneath the metal, and then of course they use gaffer's tape for all the line detail, and that stuff was a real pain because the glue had given away on a lot of that stuff, so it was all sort of like curling and peeling up. So that was a lot of time kind of re-adhering all those pieces back, at least to the few Tron suits that I displayed that I thought looked really good.
Yeah.
And we could show them some photos of the exhibit I did with Tron, because I do have some of those.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. And then, just because I don't want to forget, what were you going to say about the Greatest American Hero?
Well, I just know you love that show, and I remember you were asking me if I had seen a suit, so I just wanted to ask you if you ever did find one after all these years.
There's been one listed on eBay for quite a while, but there were basically like pretty good replicas made, so it makes it difficult to know. I mean, all these years, I don't think I've seen one come up that I've been convinced with. There was a guy out there that claimed to have 3. I don't know if it was ever true, and then he passed away. So
was that Kent Warner?
I think so.
Okay, well, because Kent Warner, I mean, I hope we're not giving away any secrets. If not, we could like just bleep out this entire thing for secrecy. But Kent Warner is the guy who was who put together the MGM auction in 1970 with White's company. You could see him because he's holding like the ruby slippers on like a pillow.
Oh, this was a different guy.
Okay. Well, here's the fun thing. He was one of the main wardrobe people on Greatest American Hero. So I always thought like with him, and I never got to meet Kent Warner, but just hearing the stories, I always figured like with him having such an eye for fabulous costuming and working on Greatest American Hero, it's just like if I was always wondering if his estate had them, or I don't know if he has an estate, but I always thought like, well, he would have been the guy to go to. It's like, where's the Greatest American Hero suits? I think he passed away not too long though after the show was done, so maybe that's part of the mystery of why Greatest American Hero costumes haven't surfaced.
Yeah, and I think they were easily damaged with all the stunts, so probably for the most part, I think they were just tossed. But
and that's the one thing, they do throw stuff out. They're like, oh, these are thrashed, toss them. Which is again, like we were just talking about, like they do throw things out. V hats, back to V. V caps and like the V sunglasses that the lizards have to wear because of the bright light. Those are really scarce. And I always thought like, well, okay, well, one theory would be that that's the perfect thing to take if you're a crew member, like a souvenir, because it's a baseball hat kind of
Right.
thing. But then on the other hand, it's like usually when the crew has stuff, it's you usually sooner or later people will be like, where'd you get that? Like, oh, I got it from a crew member. Or, where'd you get yours? Crew member. So that really hasn't been the case. So it's so funny in how stuff that should exist in multiples just sometimes, you know, doesn't exist at all. And yet something that's a one of a kind prop, like everybody, you know, somebody will proudly have it displayed. It's like, how does that survive? And yet something that's so common doesn't. And that's really the mystery of and the fun of this whole entire journey that we're on is learning like really what exists and what doesn't exist, you know?
Yeah, and like there were so many shows in like the early 80s, mid 80s that I was into, and I always just wonder like what happened to that stuff. Like the Omni from Voyagers was such a cool prop. I don't know if you ever watched that show Wizards and Warriors with like Jeff Conway and.
Well, I know I know of the show. Well, Voyagers, I've gone down the rabbit hole on. There are two other collectors that have researched it far and away more than I have, and I would defer to them for any Voyager stuff. But yeah, they're all looking for the Omni too.
Yeah, I think I talked to. Did Richard Coyle work on that, or am I thinking of the instruction book from Greatest American Hero? Because I think I talked to him about one or the other a long, long time ago.
I know the name, but I've never really spoke to him. But yeah, who knows? I mean, I know he's a very talented artist. So right? Yeah.
I think he made the instruction book for Greatest American Hero.
Is that the one where the plot was that he gets the instruction booklet after all the episodes of not knowing how to use the suit? So he like starts to read the instruction booklet and he reads like a power that can make him small. So he becomes small holding the book and then uses the power to become large again, but didn't have the book in his hand. So he becomes large again and then he loses the book because it was tiny. You know, does that make sense? It was something I thought that was so funny.
He lost it originally, like in the original, like the pilot. And then I think that might have been like a later episode where like, because they eventually like sees the aliens again and
hilarious.
Yeah, but it was a cool prop because it like lit up and it was pretty like extravagant for, you know, a televised sci-fi show at the time. I think
that's classic. That's what blows me away with props. You could have a big budget movie or TV show and you'll see a prop or something, you're like, God, that looks terrible. And then there'll be like a low budget whatever, and then you see it, you're like, oh my God, this thing's like a masterpiece, work of art. So that's the charm of props and costumes, is like you really can't ever predict, you know, I guess like big budget, some, you know, costume extravaganzas, you would expect that the costumes would be truly fantastic. But yeah, that's the fun of all this stuff. Cylons.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say there's a lot of like failed 80s shows that were really good, but no one would ever hear. Like you probably remember Tales of the Golden Monkey, which is basically like a Raiders ripoff. And
of course,
there's just so many cool shows like that lasted maybe one season, and people today wouldn't even find them because they're just not out there anymore. So
well, the same group, and I won't say their names because I don't want to, you know, without their permission to say, but the same group that loves you know, Tales of the Gold Monkey also love Voyagers because it's that universal thing. I mean, I was going to say, you know, with the Cylons, another Universal show, it's like, I don't really recommend anybody handling the props, but sometimes, you know, you have people over and they want to touch stuff. And I always tell them, don't touch the Cylon because you're going to be real disappointed when you see it's just vacuum form. It's not metal, you know.
Kind of like a stormtrooper helmet, right?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, the stormtroopers are also equally kind of low tech, but you know, that doesn't stop them from being like, you know what, at least a way up there now, 100, like 150 plus on the low end, maybe for a stormtrooper.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing I wanted to ask you about, just because you've been collecting for so long. Like, you started way before me. I started in maybe like 2002, and I remember you could get stormtrooper helmets for like 20 grand. And
Yeah, I remember that. Well, I always said if I was smarter, I would have collected nothing but Star Wars, but I don't do this because of the business side or the,
yeah,
I mean, to me, it's all passion. I mean, it's, I mean, I don't want to say anything disparaging, but I mean, sometimes dealing with the people is just exhausting. You know what I mean? And just everybody can take that as it will, but but I mean, I mean, you're not going to deal with, eccentricities and all this unless you just truly are passionate about it. But I love Star Wars. I mean, I'm first generation Star Wars fan. I mean, I was in first grade when the figures came out. I love it, and it's great to see it. But it's just, I just am amazed of the appeal of Star Wars and how the prices just continue to climb. But I totally remember when they were like that, But I mean, the thing was even when the Stormtrooper suits were 20,000. It's like, well, if you had 20,000 to spend, it's like, do I want one Stormtrooper helmet, or do I want to take that money and get like, who knows how many other, wonderful artifacts from all these other beloved shows. But again, if you look in the crystal ball, and if you're just trying to do this for investment, that may not have been the best, Battlestar Galactica, which is just, I absolutely love that show. It's not really, quite the investments as Star Wars is, but I still don't love the show any less, so
yeah.
that's
the
thing.
The thing. Like at that same time, how much Battlestar Galactica stuff could you have gotten with 20 grand? Like,
you can
quite
get
a bit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, absolutely. I mean, a very true statement. So, and that was sort of what I always did. And then, and, people will sometimes see stuff. Oh my God, you've got this, and how do you have that? And it's like, because I loved it from day one, and I was looking for, this Battlestar Galactica costume at the same time when people were looking for, Stormtrooper helmets, and it's just what I chose to focus on. And what I always find amazing is when you knew of something way back, decades ago. And sometimes things like have never resurfaced. Sometimes, you know what I mean? I just think that's interesting. Yeah. Like sometimes you see things come up at auction, but also some pieces just, just kind of are just not around, or even things that at the time we were always looking for in the early days, still to this day haven't surfaced. And you could say, oh, well, it doesn't exist. But then again, every now and then something does show itself where you're like, oh my God, how did that survive? Or where was it all these times? So that's why I always am fascinated with always ask people like, well, who had that? And it's like, it's not because I'm trying to find the source to get to that person to get more stuff, which is what I think most people might be doing. For me, it's more of a fascination of, wait, so where was it all this time? Why was it not more known or whatever? So that's always my fascination. But you must get asked that all the time, being in all of your wonderful work, being heads of stuff. Who had that? And of course, you can't say your source, but yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I always think the same thing. It always feels like at this point, everything from the 80s and 90s should have sort of surfaced or be found or know that it's out there with someone. And then you just get shocked that something really important just sort of like pops up.
Yeah. Well, like with the recent working phaser 2 from Star Trek, I mean, turns out that like, a stuntman had it or something. I don't know, more than me, but it was just like fascinating. Like I always like wondered, okay, like, well, who gave it to him? What year? I mean, just because it's so interesting to me, and then like, how do you have something so iconic like that and not have at least said, shown it to one or two people just to share it? I don't know. It's just interesting on how something like that is for 50 plus years is just not even known about. But
yeah, and that I was responsible for, so I can't
yeah,
say anything about this
no,
point,
no,
but
no, no,
it's all very interesting. Yeah, it's like
yeah.
fascinating.
Well, I
Yeah,
just to show that like just because we don't necessarily start talking about stuff doesn't necessarily mean we don't know. It's just that
right.
we have to be respectful to our colleagues and all that kind of thing. But
Yeah, yeah,
with Disney,
totally.
it's like I have a lot more I could say, but I mean, I'm trying not to. I'm trying to make it very, keep the magic there as well.
Yes,
But at the same time, share some of just the realities of. I mean, there's when you talk about other studios, archives departments. I mean, um, a lot of those other archives departments, they fix the barn doors after the horse ran off. The horses
right.
ran away, and it's like, well, it's great that you have an archive, but I guess you can really only worry about what you have from that point forward. And it's sort of like, well, I hope you have some noteworthy shows to save. You know what I mean? Because you know what I mean. So
Yeah,
I mean, but that's the thing is that Warner Brothers really has a great archive as well. They have, I think, some of the best wardrobe ever. And I was going to say, just as a fun note to the people out there, is that people say, well, how did Warner Brothers has such a great costume collection in a world where they were renting everything? And they had somebody that I know, I won't say his name, but used to work at the Warner wardrobe, and they, a show would pull a rack of stuff, and then they would see like a Humphrey Bogart suit on the rack, and he'd go, "There's no reason we have to rent a Humphrey Bogart suit." And he wouldn't let them rent it. And I'm just saying that's the kind of protectiveness that a studio needs to have. And a lot of times, they hire people that might just know wardrobe, but they don't know history.
yeah,
And that was an example of how Warner Brothers should be thanking that person, every day, for having the passion to say, like, we don't need to rent a Humphrey Bogart suit,
right,
It's just
right.
why, you know? So it's just,
Yeah, and then can we talk a little bit about sort of non-studios and individuals that have preserved stuff over the years? Like, it's funny because you're one person where I know exactly when we met in person was at Bob Burns' house. Like, it was
mhm.
you, me, Tom Spina,
Oh,
Nick Brandon, Steven, David Mandel. So a
mhm,
lot of you guys I met for the first time in person, like at that
mm,
sort of get together, and sort of the importance of like people that were saving this stuff back when kind of no one really
yeah.
was thinking about it or particularly cared, maybe.
Well, I mean, I think as far Bob Burns is amazing. I mean, he loves the stuff, and he reminds me of, like, me or you or some of our colleagues that love the stuff. Is that he loves. Well, I guess some of our colleagues are a lot more focused, but I mean, I love like everything. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't collect on everything or archive everything, but it's like, Bob Burns just is like a walking encyclopedia. So I think that sort of really did well for him. But he's such a unique and interesting individual that he just knew all these guys, and then
yeah.
like they kind of like later would give him things. Um, Nobody's given me anything, so I mean,
Yeah, me neither.
it's quite a different, it's a different thing, I mean. I love this story. Have you heard it, where he talks about riding his bike and to like one of the makeup studios and playing with the Wolfman cane from the Wolfman, and then eventually they're like, just keep it.
Wow.
And it's just like, man, I mean, that's and he's got like the only example of that.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean, this was really early for me
mm,
getting into this world. This was like 2004, and I remember, there was like the gizmo and the little Barbie car,
mm,
Darth Vader's hand with the lightsaber in it from Jedi, I think from when his hand got cut off,
yeah, I remember
the
that.
Kong armature, from the original King Kong, those Cantina creatures, a bunch of like David Cronenberg stuff. It was just like mind blowing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of like, if I had to oversimplify it, it's just that he was a mentor to these guys, and as they sort of started becoming successful in making their own films, it was like a rite of passage, like, let's give our stuff to Bob.
Right.
And he's just such a unique person, and that's such a unique story. And then, of course, like, he would do like the Halloween shows in Burbank. Coincidentally, I mentioned I lived in Toluca Lake. I mean, literally, Bob Burns his house was in walking distance from my house, and I never even heard of that. And it was going on, like, the famous Alien Halloween exhibit, which was the one where I guess 20th Century Fox just pulled up and with like a semi trailer, and they gave him all the alien assets. I mean, it's just hilarious. He still has all that stuff. But I mean, he's just got such a great legacy. And I think the one thing I would say about it is that I really hope that the collection stays together. But I don't know if that's just possible in this day and age. But I always say that the collections are important because the pieces all play off each other. And also the collection tells you so much about the person that put the collection together, about the era they were accumulated in. So I really do hope that there could be some wonderful way that all of that wonderful stuff does stay together, because I don't know, I just think it's far more interesting that, like, some of the collections, like, well, where'd you get this stuff? It's like, well, I bought it all at auction. But it's like, okay, that's great, and that's a huge achievement, but it's kind of boring when compared to, like, wait, where did Bob Burns get all this stuff? It's like, well, they gave him the alien stuff. Like, that's not true. It's like, yes, it is true. Or where'd they get the Glenn Strange Frankenstein head appliance? Well, Glenn Strange gave it to him. I mean, it's just like, wait, he knew Glenn. There's just so much story that just comes from just asking simple questions on, like, well, where'd you get this? Or where'd you get that? Sort of back to, like, what I was mentioning about, I'm always fascinated with, wait, how did this guy end up with this prop? I mean, what year, who gave it to him? I mean, it's just, I love all that stuff so much.
I mean, I guess in a perfect world, it would, like, Mopop would have a Bob Burns basement and everything would be there, and there'd be a little video player of him telling, like, the story of each piece and, the background. And
I mean, if I was, had, I don't even I won't say any of the rich people's names because some people can't stand those people. But I was to say, can you imagine just funding a Bob's Basement permanent, exhibit? I mean, who wouldn't want to go see that? Because, I mean, how magical. I mean, his place is just, it's just crazy to all the people that have heard the rumors that haven't gotten to see it. I mean, it literally is just,
hey, everybody, an old man's talking.
But I would imagine that some of the young kids these days would go through it, with the exception of a few shows, would be like, what's that? What's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea? What's the Time Machine? Which is a little bit kind of a bummer. But maybe sometimes if you see the Time Machine in person, you go, well, I guess I need to see this movie then. You know what I mean? So maybe there's a way that the artifacts themselves end up, making people aware of the movies and the TV shows they came from. So I don't know. I think that there's could be hope, but I don't know. I mean, we could do a whole talk just on how Bob found the time machine, because it's just like, he went to the DimGM auction and he tried to buy it and he didn't buy it. And then somebody else bought it. And then, I don't know. It's just, I don't think anybody, unless you do what we do, really understands and how hard won all of these things are. I mean, and even if you just buy something out of an auction catalog, even have to win the item is like a triumph and a battle unto itself, right?
Oh yeah.
So,
I mean, there's so many pieces where, like, the month leading up to the auction, you're just thinking, or in my case, a lot of times it was like, what do I need to sell to be able to buy this out of my current collection? But also just, you never know what's going to happen.
Well, I gotta
you
ask,
you could get a great deal on it. You could get just blown out of the water where you have never had any hope at all. So,
well, am I allowed to ask you questions, or
yeah, yeah.
because with you, somebody who is so researched and goes so deep on the how to authenticate and all this, and then also having done so much of the great things that you've done, and you've kind of seen it all. What's next for you? I mean, are you like, I don't want to see anything anymore, or are you like still looking for things for you, or what? So where do you want to take everything at this point in your career?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of collecting, for me, it's always been I don't want to own more stuff than I can display. So
Mm-hmm.
pretty much everything I have is on display because otherwise, I don't know, you go down that kind of rabbit hole of then there's just no end. So for me, collecting, I've always had to put restrictions on myself. That's why when I decided I wanted to just focus on music, like I got completely out of Hollywood because it's just such an expensive sort of endeavor for ordinary person to try to like maintain where you're not spending money that you don't have on things that are ultimately discretionary. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's sort of my collection is what my collection is, and usually if I'm putting something in, I'm taking something out. So it's just sort of
Mm-hmm.
in kind of this status of what it is. And there's certain bands and certain artists that I don't have anything from and I love. But if I never got another piece again for the rest of my life, like I'm super happy and grateful for what I have. So, that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of it in a nutshell for me. I would love to still collect movie props, but it's just the prices are pretty crazy. But there are things that I see that are at a reasonable level because I don't need like A-list hero things. For me, it's more like what's my connection to the movie, and is that something that's interesting and cool? Like I remember Desi, because I used to have like the T2 shotgun and pistol, and I remember he had that knife that she sort of plunks into that table, and that's not like
Mm-hmm.
a super memorable thing maybe for everyone, but for me, it's more like context to the movie and is it cool and is it one of a kind? Like I always thought that was a very cool piece. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of like you, like I'm not like, oh, I just want all the A-list Star Wars stuff. Like as you know, I used to have one of the Stormtrooper blasters, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to have like a huge Star Wars collection, but it's not something that's going to be in the cards for me ever. So that's okay. But I like to
Wow.
see
Yeah.
other people's collections, and I'm glad that other people have
Yeah. No, I'm the same
cool
way,
stuff. And
yeah, my mantra is like I have enough to take care of, and I love seeing the stuff, and I don't
yeah,
need to own. I mean, I most of the stuff I have is it was like orphaned or was stuff that I found like you know beat up and then restored or found the missing pieces to things. I mean, I'm not really an auction by auction kind of person unless it's a really
yeah.
special piece. Which actually brings me to the other question. Is like I remember you were like the first person that was really doing like a deep dive in public about like how to authenticate Superman suits.
Mhm.
What do you think is going to happen when like people start wanting to like put their suits out and like everybody's like that's not real? I mean, or maybe that's started happening a little bit, but it's like where do you think? What do you predict's going to happen with that? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of learned from the blog a lot of times like no good deed goes unpunished because I had
Oh yeah.
had people reach out to me and say, I bought this Superman costume, here's where I bought it from.
Mhm.
And like it's to me it was clearly not authentic. And then I would tell them, and then they would basically throw me under the bus with whoever they bought it from, and then that
Yeah.
person's mad at me and threatening me, and then I see them just try to resell it even though they know it's not right. So
Mm.
it's just it's very problematic, and
Yeah.
that's why I've just always been a big proponent of people who are collecting having a good network of people that they trust and they can reach out to get their opinions and insights and advice on pieces, because more and more there's just so much fraud out there. Like I've seen so many pieces that are deliberately made to deceive. Like even like I think maybe we've talked about it or been involved in a discussion like on clapper boards where someone's taking a screenshot or an on-set photo and they're literally like matching a clapper board and the writing on it and the little stickers and the tears and the scratches. And when you look at it really closely, it looks just like it at first glance, but then it's not. So, so much of it is just chain of ownership. How do you get back to the original source? There's just so many issues with Hollywood collecting.
There's just also not a lot of common sense where, and again, I'll just use this as an example. Maybe, but like you see like the Jaws clapperboard show up, which is the one with like the teeth or whatever.
Yeah.
And again, you think that like, I got to the point where I had all these wonderful auction catalogs, and then it just got to the point where I was like, oh yeah, research and archive. And then I got to the point where I can't even, it's just too much space, except for, like the ones like your Kenny Rogers auction catalog that like starts, singing when you open up. And those are the ones you keep, right? With the poker chip. But anyway, but it gets to the point where it's like, a Jaws clapperboard shows up. You're like, oh my God, there it is. And then like, then you're like, wait, there's another one? There's two of them? It's like, why would there be two? Maybe there was two. And it's just like, I feel like not a lot of people like use common sense to go like, why? Maybe there were, I don't know. But it's just like, I think that's part of the problem is there's not a lot of like immediate like thinking like, why would there be two of those? I don't know. Do you agree? Like kind of like people were just sort of like asking. One of my friends has a way where people say like, well, how do you know this is fake? And then he says, well, flip the question on him. Like, well, how do you know it's real? Ask him that question, first. And I was like, oh, that's very so simple. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it's just, I want to believe like people love this stuff. They want to buy it. They want to feel like they're getting a cool thing for a good price. And they're just sort of, deceiving themselves on some level because they're not asking those questions. They're not putting scrutiny on things.
Well, and that sort of falls into place where it's like when you ask the question like, okay, well, where was this thing? And I shouldn't say any specific names of props, but things show up where you're like, how does that exist?
Yeah.
Being so iconic and yet nobody's ever heard of that existing, at least with some props. That I've never seen, but like, there are certain things where people are like, oh yeah, that's around, even if you don't know where it is or who has it. But there's just such left field things. Like here's an example of something that's like Maria from Metropolis, like the one that the robot that kind of looks like C-3PO. It's like, no one's ever seen that, but with the way things are going, she's going to show up one day and you're going to go, come on. I mean, it's like, oh no. And then somebody justifies it. So-and-so had it, and it's like, did they though? You know? So that's what I that kind of falls under your people want to believe and all that sort of thing. And
well, then there's letters of authenticity from people who are conveniently dead. That's a big one.
Yeah. Well, I've had even people come back and ask me like, did you sign an authenticity for this prop? I'm like, nope. And it's just like, and then, and it's like not even that high of an end item, or whatever. It's just like, B or C level, maybe it's just funny. It's like you probably could have gone out and found the original prop for like half the effort, you know what I mean? And just, and got a real one I don't know. So,
yeah. I mean, I've been fortunate to have really good resources, like people that will just help me and give advice, for no other reason than to do the right thing. And then they have resources and different studios,
Yeah.
different productions, and like and I'm not going to call out specific pieces, but I've seen like pieces where I literally have had a fake one and a real one side by side, and there might be two little tells that no one would know about, and even looking at them, you wouldn't notice unless someone says, "Do you see this specific like marking on one?" I said, "Yeah, I see it on one and not the other." It's like, okay, if the other one doesn't have that, it's not right.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, when people see things in auctions and they're looking at photos, like to do true authentication, a lot of times you literally have to have hands-on access, and even to the level of using digital microscopes, blue lights, there's so many
Wow.
tools that are important that you can't use unless you physically have the item in your hand. So,
It's all fascinating. I mean, there's a whole like side to this that I think that people don't even understand. And then now to the fact that this stuff is getting so valuable, it justifies all that. But
yeah, and that's the other thing, like I kind of alluded to before, like someone will buy something thinking it's real, and then people might say, "Hey, that's not right, and here's why." And then they're just going to throw it in a different auction. And it just keeps getting recycled, There's good people that we know, like mutual friends, who have been burned, and then they don't put it back in the market. Like it's just done. But that's, I think, more of the exception than the common practice of kind of what happens.
I love wardrobe. I think I always say, because it's like the shell of the character. So if you get a piece of wardrobe or a costume ensemble displayed correctly with the right size of the actor, it's almost as close as you could get to like meeting the character, especially, when it's done really correct. But there'll be times that like I'll have a piece and I'll go through the whole movie and I'll go, okay, the piece is definitely from the production. It's correctly labeled. I have no problem with the authenticity, but I don't think it was ever worn. Because, there could be 3 examples and they just wore the number 1 the whole movie.
Yeah.
And then I put it back into auction, like, okay, well, it's real. I'm not going to, I don't point out that, okay, I couldn't screen match it. It goes back into the auction house that I got it from and they put the same description up. And then I'll end up seeing somebody that I know acquire it. And I'm like, oh, you got this piece. And then they go, yep, screen matched it. And I was going like, man, did I miss something? Or are they just hoping or wanting it to be? I think I'm pretty good with that. But it's just like, that's the other thing too. It's like, I love Back to the Future, and I have a lot of items that don't screen match, but they're production made, and I know they are because of got them right from the source. And now the big thing is all about like the screen matching, or do you have the screen matched one? And it's like, and I understand because they're worried about the authenticity. So if you can screen match, that kind of solves the problem. But the difference with me is I had the advantage of like, well, I don't have any question about the authenticity of it, and it may not screen match, but when I got it, I mean, we had like VHS. You can't screen match off of, I guess we had Laserdisc at the time, but it was, but I'm just saying that like, and then now I hear that people are faking screen matches. So it's like, that's why it's so important to like who you got it from and all that. And unfortunately that's lost when you get something through, an auction house. They can't tell you who it came from.
Yeah.
But I
mean,
feel
the screen matching thing's really interesting. Like, one of the only pieces I ever bought where I wasn't like 100% sure of authenticity was there was a radio from Die Hard, and in an auction, and the only thing kind of going for it was I had found it had been sold like in a really lesser auction a long time ago, like back in the late 90s or something, and I thought people probably wouldn't have faked it back then. And so I won it for not not too much money. And then that's right when Blu-rays were starting to come out. And it, like maybe a month later, it came out on Blu-ray, and then I was able to like screen match a scratch on the surface of the face of it where the number pad is in the metal. But like you could not see it on VHS, you couldn't see it on DVD, but you could see it on Blu-ray. So then I thought, okay, I know this is good because unless someone was looking at like 35 millimeter and were able to like freeze it or cut a frame out or something, no one would have known to put a little like scratch in it at that point anyway. But at this point, like everything's in 4K, and it's just a different world because people can take an authentic prop and freeze frame a scene in a film and scratch it or tear it to match something they're seeing, and then say, "Oh, it screen matches," you know.
Wow. I mean, it's just it's like I always say it's like you can't write this stuff, you can't make it up, but it's all true. So
I know we're running a little long. Hopefully you still have time, but I wanted to talk to you about some of the stuff in your collection. And it'd be cool if we could throw up some images. If you can send me some
of course.
images too, that would be awesome. Like, what are some of your favorite movie prop, TV prop, and also like rock and roll? I'd love to hear sort of about some of the pieces you have too.
Yeah, rock and roll. I love Kiss and the Beatles. Creedence Clearwater. But the only thing that I really was able to get my hands on were costumes from Kiss from the classic makeup era. I missed Beatles stuff probably by about 5 years because when I was starting to get into this stuff and realized it was around, you saw like, you know the Beatles, right?
I've heard of them.
The Beatles. Yeah. Okay, they were like, I think they're from Britain, but like the Rubber Soul album, John Lennon's wearing this brown suede jacket. I mean, that was an auction. And it was, to me, it was like, oh my God. I mean, that is like so amazing that like something like that even hit the auction block, and it didn't even go for that much money. It was like, maybe at the time, but it was, but yeah, still looking for Beatles stuff, but I'm very glad I've got my Kiss costumes.
Were you watching? I know Kiss had like an official auction like quite a long time ago.
That's where it came from, the stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. It's so funny too, because Kiss fans will come over and they'll go like, "Oh my God, what is all this Hollywood stuff?" And they'll be like, "You got to like get rid of that stuff and like focus on Kiss," And then like people come over and they see, Hollywood something, and then they like, "Why do you have Kiss?" You know what I mean? So it's like it just goes to show that like. And I always tell them, it's like, it's just what I like, it's not what I think other people.
And a lot of the Kiss stuff had like property of Kiss, like barcodes and stuff on them, right?
Well, they had like the Christie's, Butterfield's tags on them, but yeah, nothing.
But I think some of the gear, had like,
the road cases
sort of
and all
internal,
that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the funny thing is sometimes, and I've never publicly displayed the Kiss costumes, but I know one of the other really big archivists of Kiss, and he says sometimes he's displayed the Kiss stuff at like a Kiss convention, which are way more a thing on the East Coast. And he says people come up and be like, "Those aren't real. Look how crappy those look, or look how dirty they're. I mean, look how beat up." And it's like, oh my God, it's like it's totally the real stuff. So sometimes the public doesn't really know what they're looking at, and I think that's the thing that like sometimes it's like it's neat when you can have an exhibit and you can be like, no, this is the real stuff, and then hopefully the public believes it so they can actually learn that this stuff does sometimes look a little different in person, which is the charm of seeing it,
Yeah.
But anyway,
one cool thing about them is I know in current tours they've done like where they'll play a guitar on stage for one song or something, and then basically sell it to a fan. Like you could actually pick which show on their website and like
it's
have
hilarious.
Them personalize it to you. Like that's super awesome.
It's awesome. I mean, and I'm all for it. I mean, Paul Stanley was literally like changing guitars every song. Why is he doing that? I'm like, oh, he's selling the guitars.
Smart.
Like this one was played on this. Yeah, it is very smart. Well, Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, I mean, they are very, very savvy,
Yeah.
I think that they might have regretted selling the stuff off when they did, because I think now it would have probably really gotten a lot more.
totally.
But I'm glad they did it because I was able to get stuff. Film wise, I mean, I have a lot of wonderful things, but I think I'm most proud of my Mattel hoverboard, which at this particular time is the only one that's known to screen match to Back to the Future 2 or 3. So I'm really happy with that.
Is it lenticular or wood, foam?
Yeah, well, I'll give away a secret to everybody, and this is sort of my rabbit hole Back to the Future. I saw everything the Property Master had, and very few boards were lenticular. And they, you know, for those that don't know, they had a lenticular hoverboard that you primarily see in the second movie. And then in the third film, they went to more like a photo kind of non-lenticular graphic.
Yeah. And the lenticular were like separate pieces that were like glued
vinyl
on,
individually placed. And I heard that was problematic. They would peel up and stuff. But I have seen at least 2 or 3 boards where the lenticular is underneath the hoverboard with the hoverboard's new Part 3 graphic glued on top.
Yeah.
And I think
mutual friend told me about that last year.
Yes, and that probably him and I sharing information. I think that the boards, the reason we haven't screen matched more boards to 2 is because the ones that were used in 2 were probably refreshed for 3. And I'm going to stick to that because I only really known about maybe 2 or 3 lenticular boards, and there should be more. And when you consider the one that I have used to be in lenticular, I know of one other one that was a wood board that used to be in lenticular. That explains why there's fewer. So that one's just love that. And
is yours wood or foam?
It's foam. And that's the other thing with I'd say to people is like they're usually using the foam boards is because who wants to hold anything that weighs more than an ounce on set all day, you know?
Yeah, those wood ones are pretty heavy.
They are. Now I've seen beautiful wood boards. I mean, just absolutely gorgeous. And they look more like what you'd think the prop would look like. Whereas that's sort of the one thing. I've actually had a few people that have seen, at one point I had a couple Mattels and they said, why did you keep this one? It's all beat up, you know? And it's like, well, because it's screen matched and it's used. And that's sort of the big trick or secret that we tell people out there. It's like usually the more beat up something is, or the wardrobe more dirty and soiled, it usually meant it got the most wear. So you have people.
My first big purchase actually was a wooden board I got from Desi.
Nice.
And
well, he knows
I really wish I had
and...
that because I ended up I needed money to buy something else and I put it in auction and it did very well, but it was like a beautiful, beautiful board.
Oh man, that's if I had just sat on all that stuff, you know, I mean, with what they're going for, I mean, can you imagine? But I mean, but that's the thing. I've never been about like, here's 7 hoverboards. Yeah, I mean, it's just not. I had the gang's hoverboards too, and it's just if I was only gonna collect or archive Back to the Future, that's one thing. But when I love movie and television so much, it's like you have to sort of focus what your collection is.
Totally.
That's where a lot of people I think get into the weeds is when they're like, I collect Star Wars, and then it's like, oh, well, what do you collect on Star Wars? Everything, and you're like, oh man, and then they end up getting. I mean, even the big Star Wars collectors have. I mean, some of the people like started off collecting everything and then they started saying, no, I do this, and I'm like, yes, because otherwise you go kooky. You'll be like in a straitjacket. And then film wise, God, I think the thing that, I think this Christopher Reeve costume means a lot because, and that was one I got directly from Warner Brothers, so that was really special. But I mean, it's hard to pick, one thing. One piece that I'll share that I got recently was the miniature Bluesmobile from the Blues Brothers, which is actually not quite a miniature. It's actually, I guess, what Peter Jackson coined as a bigature. It's about 4 feet. But I'll tell you a story. My wife's family used to own a ranch out in like Lake Piru, Lake Piru, for those that don't know, is actually right outside Valencia. It's like kind of where like kind of a bummer, but it's like where the Twilight Zone accident happened. But they had sold off. My wife's family had worked at Universal Studios for several generations, and they sold the ranch at one point to another person, family who was a Universal Studios multi-generational family. And they were deciding they were going to sell the ranch. And they said, Rob, you should come up here because we have a bunch of stuff that you might be interested in because we hear you love Hollywood memorabilia. And I'd gone out and it was mostly camera parts because I actually have been able to put together several historic 35 millimeter cameras.
Oh, wow.
So they had heard I'm into that stuff. So I was up there and trying to find pieces like magazines or viewfinders, and that was really awesome. And then the gentleman said, he called me up and he goes, hey, you got to come over to the house and take a look at some more stuff. So we're in his garage looking at stuff, and he mentions working on the Blues Brothers. And I said, Blues Brothers? I'm like, you worked on that? He goes, yeah. I'm like, where's the miniature Bluesmobile? He goes, well, that was at the ranch. Didn't you see it last week?
Wow.
And I'm like, what? And
That's
then
crazy.
We drove back out there again. And sure enough, there were two of them literally that were sitting outside the barn in the rain for decades. And it was just so funny to me that you just, had I not had just asked him like, wait, where's this? It might have been like, oh, Rob didn't want that. And it's not that I didn't want, I just never saw it. So I thought that was kind of neat. So, but yes, that was a neat story.
Amazing.
So it's neat when you end up with something like that you were looking for. And a matter of fact, because there's one other one that a mutual friend of ours has, and I saw that at his place. I was like, that is like, in my opinion, one of the greatest miniatures I've ever seen. And then it's always very satisfying. And then I'll tell you, then later, there was 4 of them made for Blues Brothers. So he had one. I was working when I was at Disney on a show called According to Jim, which was starred Jim Belushi. He had one of them that he hung over the green room. And I remember looking at that and going like, that's an original Bluesmobile. And the crew was like, no, that's a replica. And I was like, that is not a replica. But I understood why that they were being told that, because they, well, that's a valuable movie prop. And apparently they said Jim likes to keep something of John's on set always. And I said, there's 2. And then the funny thing was that the other 2 showed up at that ranch. And I was like, well, there's all 4 of them. So that's the kind of things that I think that there might be a little bit of like karma or kismet connected to this stuff in a way, is that, that it was just neat to, find all 4 of them and, or at least, not, I didn't find all 4, but to find where they all went to. And then, and then, cool. And then, so, but the ones that that you kind of, what I say, find on the tree, as they say, like when you pick the fruit off the tree, are always the ones I think that have sort of the best stories. So it's neat to be able to share those, with people the 10 people in the world that care. And you and I are 2 out of the 10.
I think there's at least 20.
Okay, maybe so. But yeah, the people that care really care, and the people that don't care, sometimes you can convert them with like, well, that's an interesting story. But I think that, who doesn't love movies and television? So it's just so fun. But yeah.
And then what about TV? Some of your favorite TV props?
TV, probably The Adventures of Superman, first, second season Superman suit.
Oh, wow.
That's the one.
Is that black and white?
That's the black and white one. Yeah, the gray and brown. And I'm very proud of that one because I had heard about that one for a long time, and I remember thinking like, well, that's the one to have because it was never really outside of the special effects supervisor who it came from, and then it went to 2 other really notable people. And when it came up for auction, I was like, that's the one that I really want, because I feel like that's the one that's going to reveal all the, that's the one that you could use to be able to tell like how a suit should be. If you follow
Right.
what I'm saying,
Yeah, totally.
I mean, just like not to give away, I can't really say anything other than everybody thinks that like, oh, this company made them. It's like, well, they didn't make the ones from the first and second movie, that's for sure. So that's sort of the things that you kind of play close to the vest because, if some show up and they have they're, you know what I mean, you just right off the bat go wrong. And well, how do you know? It's like, well, because here's this one here, So I'm just saying, because it's like, we got to know, because it's, I mean, who wants to look at something in a museum someday that's not real, right?
Yeah, I have.
Well,
it's
that's
a
whole
weird,
other.
It's a weird experience.
That's a whole other. That's a whole other thing. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we shouldn't even get us started on that.
I know.
Danger, Will Robinson.
Yeah,
Danger.
but I don't know. I mean,
Danger.
yeah. Do we leave on that note? It just feel like mic drop.
No, I think that's good. Wait for our next interview.
I would love to talk to you more about what we're gonna do in a world where, I mean, I'll just remember the Star Trek props that turned out to be like all the phasers, communicators, and tricorders. And I was saying for years, like, oh, what do you have in your collection? I have a landing party kit. Like, really? What's that? Well, that's a phaser tricorder communicator. And I'm like, oh, cool. What? I have one too. And then you started going like, wait a minute. This was a low budget television show made by Desilu. Why would there be so many of these? And people literally be like, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. You've only been collecting props for 10 years or something. And then it's like everything that your initial instincts sort of like were saying turned out to be true. Right?
Yeah.
So
and these are the ones that were weathered by like burying them in the backyard, right?
I mean, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, and it's just to me, it's just like common sense sometimes. It's just like we'll throw out a lot of these questionable things, but a lot of times people, like you said, they want to believe it,
Yeah.
So that's the X-Files poster. I want to believe.
Yes, exactly.
And then have
It's
like a phaser.
Poster.
Instead of a phaser, instead of the spaceship, you put a phaser too, and it says, I want to believe. And people are like, what does that even mean? It's like, well, people, if you know, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you could Photoshop, make it like an Enterprise instead of a flying saucer, and then have it like transporting down a fake phaser.
I love that. Let's make those.
I want to believe.
That should be behind you in all the episodes of your show.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to believe.
I can put it right there instead of the New Order poster.
That's so funny. How's Coldplay? Are you still following them around?
I haven't seen them for years. To be honest, I just haven't. Like their albums haven't grabbed me since Milo Xyloto, but their new album that just came out like 2 weeks ago or something, I absolutely love. So that's like the first album in like 10 years where I'm just like, oh yeah, this is a total banger. Like,
because I remember you were telling me like they'd see you and be like, hey, you need tickets, and it'd be like, like everybody.
Yeah, I've
wants
got
to
a Chris Martin shirt there.
Cool.
Yeah, they're such great guys. They're so nice.
Isn't that? I've always found like the more successful people are, the nicer they are. At least from my experience, So, yeah.
Well, it's funny. There's this video from Chris Martin when he's like in college. He's wearing braces, and he's basically like, in 3 years, everyone in the world's going to know who we are. And like this was before they did anything, and then it only took like 2 years. Like it's crazy, but they're just really gifted guys. Very nice.
4 years. It's now the 26th of June, 1998. By the 26th of June, 2002, the Coldplay, or the band, whatever they're called then, will be known just all over, man. We're so proud. So Spinal Tap, Guy, Will, John, and Chris. Don't you forget. Massive. Absolutely huge.
Well, I love the fact that you love all the music stuff. I'd love to pick your brain about just, music. Maybe we can go call a few of your contacts and see if they want to sell any guitars or something. Just you never know.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Totally.
yeah.
I'm all about that.
Sometimes some of these guys, you'd be, I don't know. I've heard so many stories. I heard like Noel Gallagher from Oasis talking about like sometimes people would just from famous bands that liked them would just send them like their guitars for them to play. Be like, this person can't be stupid enough to send me the actual guitar from their band. And he goes, turns out they were. He's like, this isn't going back. So it's just funny. The music people it's a whole different
funny.
mentality though. So whole different way of thinking.
Yeah, totally.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. I'm honored, and it's always so fun to talk to you. And this is just like a normal conversation on the phone, except now we're sharing it with your viewers. So
that's actually the genesis of it, because I talk to cool people all the time, and I just think like it's kind of just wasted on me alone. So why not make it into a show? So here we are.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, here's to many more cool conversations with cool people on your show. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Jason.